strange, it's alien, and it won't give us what we would like to have.
So the other day I was sitting at the doctor's office, and I had with me a book, an actual book. And just by way of backstory with this book, it was a paperback copy of a book that I've been using quite a bit as part of the Liberty 250 series preparation. And the reason I had a paperback copy of it was because I have no clue what I did with my hardback copy of it. I had it in the bedroom, I was reading, I sat it down, and I cannot find it. No clue where it went. I'm baffled. Spent 2 days looking for it, finally said, screw it, went and bought a paperback copy of it, and that's the book that I had with me when I went to the doctor's office. And it was kind of weird, I guess, in a way. I was just sitting there reading, and the next thing I knew, there was this woman in front of me, an elderly lady, who was patting me on the shoulder and saying how pleased she was to see someone actually reading a book as opposed to nose deep in a phone or a tablet or a computer or whatever. So it was an unexpected but nice conversation about a book. But it started raising these questions in my mind about reading in general and whether or not we're losing that connection in reading, particularly when it comes to the history, classics, philosophy, those sorts of things. I actually picked up another book this week by Mary Beard about how we're dealing with classical education and a lot of the same concerns there. And that same question, are we losing that connection to these things? Or has time simply changed and we are changed by them? Is it a point in history where we no longer read these things because we don't have to? I mean, I have right over there, I have the book from the American Revolution documentary, Ken Burns' recent documentary, but I also have all the episodes taped. Now, does it matter? Which of those two is going to provide me with better and more information? Have we reached a point in our society where, as the London Times asked a few weeks ago, people aren't reading history or classics anymore because why? They can get them elsewhere. Fascinating discussion about podcasts and the fact that there are so many history podcasts now, that sales of actual history books have fallen something like 17% over the last 5 years. People aren't actually reading history anymore. They're just getting it from the podcast, which on the one hand, I'm cool with. On the other hand, potentially a problem, right? Are we losing that connection? History remains a means of teaching. And as we've talked about before, there are purposes for what we are teaching and why we're teaching it. Are we educating people? Are we encouraging people? Are we inspiring people or just entertaining them? And I have long said to you, and yes, I'm going to use that word again, history is used to inculcate societal values into the next generation. And before you send me emails saying, many of you are of a faith in which the leading figure in your faith used what are known as parables, stories, to inculcate values. Those things didn't necessarily actually happen, but he was telling these stories to get people to understand things. And history can be used the same way. We tell stories from history to teach those values, just like the Romans did, the famous speech of Scipio Africanus, so forth and so on. But the real question then becomes, does it matter if that story comes from a book or a podcast or a TV show? It does matter, I think, it has to matter, and there's a reason why. And that reason is very simple. If I sit here on this podcast and I tell you some historical fact that seems plausible, but maybe not necessarily there, the USS Batfish in February of 1945 sank 3 Japanese submarines, which is unheard of. Is that a true fact? On What the Frock this week, we're going to talk about true facts about the Netherlands. We're going to celebrate some stuff that involves the Netherlands and the United States, and we're going to tell you some true facts about the Netherlands. And some of those facts are going to sound crazy. Are they true, or is Dave just making them up? How would you know? If all you're doing is listening to a podcast, where is my source? If I don't tell you the source, if I don't footnote the source, if I don't do those kinds of things, which means you got to go read it, how do you know? A book, you don't necessarily have those problems. Usually a book is going to have good source material. It's going to have, background, and it's going to have information that you can track down. Some years ago, back when I was still a minister, I had heard a sermon years before, and there was nothing particularly crazy about the sermon. It wasn't anything like that, but it was one of those Advent sermons, and the person teaching was teaching about John the Baptist and the Annunciation of John the Baptist. He was talking about how Zechariah received the vision from the angel Gabriel and so forth and so on, and he, almost as a throwaway line, he mentioned the fact that Zechariah, as a priest, had been chosen by lots to go in and do the things in the temple, and that once he had done that, he would never be permitted to do it again. You got one shot in your life. If it even came up, that was it. Once you did that, you were done. You never went back again. And 5-6 years later, I was working on something, and that little factoid came into my head, and I couldn't make that work. And so I actually called him. At the time, he was in, I don't remember where he went. The sermon was in Portsmouth, Virginia, and at the time I was in Atlanta, so I don't remember where I called him. But I called him and I said, Dean, do you remember this sermon that you gave, 7 years ago, 5-7 years ago in Portsmouth about this, this, and this? And of course he did, because Dean is that kind of guy that has a perfect memory. And he said, yeah. I said, I got a question on something you said in that sermon. And I asked him the question, where's that information? Where is that? And he was able to give it to me in a book that I just happened to have, and I was able to find it and go on. And I think that for me, that's why books remain important. It's why these ideas that we are able to track them down matter. We're going to talk next week on Dave Does History about an event, and we're going to talk about a cannon, a gun, firing cannon. And the cannon's name is Old Mother Covington. And I want you to know that I spent, getting ready for a Dave Does History, a 30-minute presentation on Bill's show. Yeah, I know it's an hour, but with commercials and everything, it's about 32 minutes. I'll spend somewhere between 6 and 8 hours getting ready for that. Normally, I want you to know that I spent 3 hours yesterday trying to find why they named the cannon Old Mother Covington. Now, that's not the kind of thing you're going to get in a podcast. It's not the kind of thing you're going to get on a TV show. They throw it out there because they think it's an interesting fact. Oh, the cannon was named Old Mother Covington. But they never tell you why. And part of being a historian is going out and unlocking those reasons. Why is this named this way? A few weeks ago, my wife and I went to Seattle. We like to do that. I don't really like Seattle that much, but there are parts of Seattle that I do like, particularly the waterfront area. And I actually do like Pike's Place Market, even though it's kind of a Charlie Foxtrot these days. there's a restaurant there that we really like. It's a Greek place. And anyway, it was one of those days. It was Sunday. There was no football that day that I cared about. And so we just decided to hop the ferry and go to Seattle and get some Greek food. I mean, that's literally all it was. And as we were walking down the waterfront, we stopped in one of the little shops there. And the shop had this, it's a key. It's a skeleton key. It's a metal skeleton key. It's kind of rusty. It's old, obviously. And it was for sale. A couple of bucks or something like that. I'm not clear why, but it just sort of, I couldn't let it go. I kept looking at it. I kept putting it down. I kept picking it back up. I kept putting it down. And I finally just said, you know what? I'm going to buy that. I don't know why. I just did. But the key started questions in my head about, what does this unlock? What was it used for? Who had this key before me? Before it found its way into a curio shop somewhere and just sat there waiting for somebody to come along. What does this key unlock? And I started thinking, maybe it's just a metaphor for me. Maybe this key, which sits right in front of me on my desk now, is just a reminder that there are a lot of things yet to be unlocked, a lot of things yet to be discovered, a lot of things yet to be found. Over the course of the last few months, I've been working on my application to join the Sons of the American Revolution. As you know, my great 8 generations ago grandfather was a Revolutionary War soldier, went to visit his grave a few years ago in Blount County, Alabama. And it's meaningful to me because of my passions about this country, about its founding, and because I want my son to have that connection to the past, particularly given my paternal side of my family is a little bit weird, and we've discovered some things about that we've unlocked some things about that are a little, everybody wants their history to be clean and exciting. And sometimes it's not. But on my maternal side, going all the way back to Virginia, Charlottesville, Virginia, in the 1740s, my family was heavily involved with the American Revolution. And because of this passion that I have, and anyway, as I started this process, one of the things that was unlocked is I started getting emails from people saying, hey, are you related to this person, this person, this person? And in tracking those things, I found my family, particularly on my mother's side, all the way back to, as I said, 1741 in Albemarle County, Virginia. We actually found them all the way back to England in the 1300s, but that's a story for another day. But this connection that I have, as it turns out, to the American Revolutionary War is much more definitive and much more strong than I ever imagined. Yes, my great-great-grandfather 8 generations ago was a soldier in the militia in North Carolina and South Carolina. Yes, my favorite thing from all of that is his wife, my great-great-great-great-grandmother's statement about not being able to remember her anniversary date, which I don't find surprising because I have a hard time remembering the exact date of mine. But she wrote in the book, don't remember the exact date, but it was shortly after our liberty had been won, which just, that still gives me chills. That's what mattered to them. I love this stuff, and I'm finding these new connections, this key is unlocking these things for me. And I'm discovering things about not just my family, but my nation as we go through all this stuff. And yeah, it's kind of changed the directions of some things that I've had. But it also requires me to get back into the books. It requires me not to just rely on podcasts and websites. And there are some really good ones out there. I'm not taking anything away from those. What I'm saying is that if we're really going to unlock history, if we're really going to unlock the past and use it to actually teach ourselves those values that we need to know, we're going to have to get outside of just what somebody said. If you're taking everything I say for gospel truth, I wouldn't do that. It's not that I'm sitting here making stuff up, because I'm not. I do a lot of research. I do a lot of work. But mistakes can be made. Misinterpretations can happen. Sometimes it's the wrong key trying to open the lock. But by working together and by getting into the histories, getting into the recordings, and getting into all those kinds of things that have been written down, we might find out why that canon was named Old Mother Covington. Just like we found out why Zechariah never went back into the temple again. All these things matter. All these things are part of who we become and why we become it. And all I can say is I encourage us to continue to unlock those doors.
Check out more stories from history at davedoeshistory.org.